Probably as I look around, I kind of realise just how many other people who are on this call who could actually probably share much more effectively than me. So if at some point you think, gosh, this doesn't make a great deal of sense, just go away and make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. My aim is probably to talk for about 15, 17 minutes. And Val, I hope that you got a wee message from me earlier about at various points, maybe just to stick some links in the chat that people might find useful. So the gathering in Glasgow towards the end of this year, the 26th gathering of the Conference of the Parties, has been described as our last best chance to save the planet. It is, I reckon, the most important gathering in these islands in our lifetime. There'll be those who might say that we're already too late, that life as we have known it is already disappearing through rising tides and temperatures, through diminishing forests and species. What was said in the past, that future wars would be fought over water rather than oil, is beginning to feel a reality. What was less understood, at least by me, was that oil and fossil fuels more generally was the cause of such apparently irreversible damage. The earth, our home, is beginning to look like an immense pile of filth. These are not my words, but the words of Pope Francis in his 2015 encyclical, Laudate Si. The earth is the Lord's and everything within it, writes the psalmist. And it's worth reflecting on how small a part we are within the lifespan of planet Earth. As Bill McGibbon reminds us, day to day we forget that if the billions of years of life on Earth were scaled to a 24-hour day, our settled civilizations began about a fifth of a second ago. A fifth of a second ago. And then to be further reminded that by most accounts, we've used more energy and more resources during the last 35 years than in all of human history that came before. We do not own the planet, but rather to a large extent, it owns us. Certainly, we cannot live without it. We're called to be stewards of the earth, but if we face reality, we've become abusers of God's beautiful creation. Not all of us, of course. And this is where it becomes even more challenging and even more unjust. The poorest are suffering most, although their lifestyles have done the least to cause the damage. Joel and Gary in their presentation shortly will make that abundantly clear.
Got it.
Something that was already obvious a few years ago has become crystal clear as we look through the lens of the COVID pandemic and the local, national and global inequality that it is thrown into even starker relief. It's this: we need a new way of organising the way we live. We cannot build back better unless we build back differently, unless we build back with. Tim Gorringe, the Professor of Divinity at Exeter University, writes, to the objection that the proposals for an alternative economy are utopian, I reply, first, that nothing is so wildly utopian as to try to build a sustainable world on the basis of greed and competition. There are not two separate crises facing us at this present time, the climate crisis and the inequality crisis, but one single crisis. It is probably the greatest crisis we have ever faced in human history, and perhaps even in the history of our planet. Although folk tend to say that about every crisis. Is it possible to collaborate with one another in the way that God intended, so that God's beautiful creation, including us, might flourish? Or is it already too late? That's the question that COP26 will help to answer. The Paris Climate Agreement set targets to which the nations of the world signed up, which gave us a chance of avoiding the abyss. Many would argue rightly that the targets were not necessarily ambitious enough, but targets mean little unless they're met. Glasgow will be about identifying both how we are doing and what are the next vital steps. Paris was about laying out the ambition. Glasgow is about creating the framework agreement to deliver it. It would be easy to say that the signs are not hopeful, but actually there are some signs that change might be possible, politically, institutionally, technologically. But the change is of such a scale that the people responsible for delivering it will need to be encouraged, cajoled, emboldened into making it. And this is where we and millions of others come in. Change of the scale required will not happen because the leaders of the world voluntarily choose to sign up to it. It's too painful and too difficult for that. It will happen because the people of the world demand it. I've long believed that part of the prophetic calling of the church is to embolden our leaders, including at times our church leaders, to do the right thing. And I might suggest it will happen, if it is going to happen, in ways that I don't really understand. It's going to happen because of the prayers of all God's people, the actions of all God's people, and the Spirit of God blowing in new ways. So let me take us now from the big picture of why change is so desperately needed to the specific questions about what we might do about it. And it's here I shift in some ways from a role within Christian Aid or within the Church of Scotland into my position as COP ambassador for Glasgow Churches Together. You know, I've never been an ambassador before. I don't think I'm ever likely to be one again. I've heard lots of Ferrero Rocher jokes over the last months. Actually, it's a tiny role. I describe it to people like this. It's about holding the door open so as others get the chance to speak. And as I hold the door open, there is a particular commitment towards those who are least likely to be heard and whose wisdom and experience is most vital. In our work within Glasgow Churches Together, we're focused around three interrelated spheres of activity. And supporters of Christian Aid, I believe, can contribute in all three of them. The first of these is about hospitality and welcome. We do not know for certain, and COVID casts a long shadow here, but if it is possible, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, it could even have been hundreds of thousands of people will descend upon Glasgow to make our call for justice heard. And those who come need somewhere to stay. Hotel beds in the city and its environment could cost in the region of £1,000 a night. How many of us could welcome a guest into our homes to give them somewhere to stay? It could be an official delegate or a climate activist or someone who's part of the many pilgrimages that will make their way to the city and to Scotland. Just because you don't live in Glasgow doesn't mean that you can't help. If you live within an hour of the city, your spare bed could be a haven. If you've travelled thousands of miles, an extra 40, 50, 60 isn't that far. And if you live further afield, could you offer hospitality before or after the COP? Could you give people the chance to see our beautiful country? Much of this work has been coordinated through Stop Climate Chaos Scotland and the development of a Homestay Hotel. Think of it, if you like, as a version of Airbnb not for profit. You sign up to say that you can take guests, and they match you with your involvement and agreement with people who need a bed. And Val has hopefully posted the details of Homestay Hotel in the chat, and I really, really hope that lots of us will sign up. We have already. I've had the awesome privilege of staying in strangers' homes across the world. Strangers who have become friends and who've then changed my understanding of the world. We've also had the privilege of welcoming people to our flat who started as strangers and became friends. A confession. On more than one occasion, my wife has called me to say, Martin, someone called so-and-so has just arrived at the door. Are we expecting them? This, however, is not just about being generous. This is about doing a fundamentally Christian thing. It's about welcoming Christ in the stranger's guise. It's about entertaining angels, including angry angels who want justice for the poorest on the planet. If the first sphere is hospitality and welcome, the second is about worship, prayer, and pilgrimage. Can I confess, and I'm slightly worried that this is being recorded, but can I confess that I'm not sure how prayer works? But I'm sure that it does. Let's surround the COP with a chain of prayer, seeking to hear and act upon the Spirit of God breaking out amongst us. If you have not already done so, why don't you, with others, sign up for Christian Aid's chain of prayer? Again, Val's put that link in the chat. Let's together say Amen to climate justice. In the lead up to COP, churches together in Britain and Ireland are asking every church to sign up to host a climate Sunday service, a service of worship where your church focuses on the need for climate change. Climate Sunday is on the 5th of September, and there'll be a special service in Glasgow Cathedral that day. But the ambition is that thousands of churches will host a similar service in the lead up to COP. And during COP itself, there will be hundreds, maybe even thousands of special services held every day in many places across the planet. Hospitality and welcome, prayer, worship and pilgrimage, and finally campaigning and advocacy. COP is complicated. The language is dense and difficult for many of us, or at least dense and difficult for a numpty like me. One of my friends, at least I think he's a friend, in encouraging me to consider this role, suggested that we did not need another person who understood all the technicalities of climate change. So whilst we will hear lots of talk and very legitimate campaigns that I hope many of us will get involved in, I personally will be trying to encourage people to focus on two big issues. The first of these is cutting carbon emissions. No ifs, no buts, it needs to be done, and we all have a part to play in our homes, in our communities, in our congregations, in our churches, in our nations, in our world. If your congregation is not yet an eco-congregation, what are you waiting for? If you're not yet using a green tariff for your electricity, then why not? Our nation has some of the most ambitious carbon reduction targets in the world, but they count for absolutely hee-haw unless we can persuade our governments to deliver on them and to go further and to go faster. Cut carbon emissions. And then the second thing is what in the language of COP26 is often articulated as being about loss and damage. Loss and damage is about what is happening to our planet because of climate change. It includes sudden, shocking events, such as cyclones or flooding, or longer term impacts caused, for example, by rising sea levels. And the reality, as we all know, is that those who are experiencing the greatest problems are those who have the least resources to address the symptoms and causes. Changes in climate may be weird for all of us, but it is catastrophic for some of us. These are the parts of the world, the nations of the world, many of which Christian Aid and our partners are active within, where the funds needed to be found, not only to address the damage, but to seek to address the loss, are simply not there. So we need a global justice fund, and to campaign to encourage our own governments to play their part in that fund, to pay for this transition, where those who are most able to pay, pay, and those least able to pay do not suffer. Again, we can be campaigning for this to happen at a local, at a national, and at a global level. Your church can do something about it. Our nation can do something about it. The world's leaders need to be convinced to do something about it. For actually, they may well not have the moral courage to do it unless we can convince them that their future and our future and the future of Mother Earth depends upon it. I want to finish in 1 minute, but in ending, I want to say one other thing. I want to say that it is vital that the voices which are heard most clearly, most powerfully, and most articulately over the coming months leading up to COP, through COP, and beyond COP are not the voices of people like me, white, male, middle class, bordering on elderly. We need, as we face into the challenges which lie ahead, to heed the prophetic voices of the young and the clarion voices of those who struggle against poverty and injustice in their bellies and in their souls, as well as in their heads. In this Christian Aid and the Faith Impact Forum and others have such an important part to play. This is, not to be too dramatic about it, our last best chance to save the planet.